Okay. We left off on page 83. But we're going to back up there to 82 just a bit, about the middle of the page there on page 82, where it says Yisrayl 2, verse 10. Let's start off there because this is rather fitting for just briefly looking over this material, and it's like it was written for as if it was perfectly tailored for today's time, especially what's going on now. Yisrayl 2 verse 10 says, the sun and the moon will be dark. Even the sun's rays cannot penetrate the thick layer of atmospheric debris that this last nuclear war will stir up. Because of Satan's hatred for Yahweh's people, she's willing to destroy all life from the face of the earth just to destroy the house of Yahweh. And remember, all these things, as it says, the elements will melt with fervent heat, and all these things will be destroyed. Almost all life from the face of this earth. And when Satan gathers her army and the heaven is covered in debris, at this moment all hope of life will be gone. And that's a pretty sobering thought, isn't it? Think about the fact that almost all life, the hope of all life, will be gone. The hope of all life. That includes us, brother. That includes us. You're going to come out and take a look and see nothing but dark, black, gloomy skies, the scripture says. As gloomy as can be, gloomier than any rainstorm you've ever been through. And you're going to think, there's nothing but death here. How in the world will I survive? It's only going to be Yahweh. Yahweh's the only one who can keep us alive. That's what we're going to go through. So, if people think that it's just something that's just going to, a little skip in the park, you better get your mind focused on Yahweh, and you better get your mind right. You better get your life right and realize. You better examine yourself deeply and see where you need to change. So when Satan gathers her army and the heaven is covered in debris, at this moment all hope of life will be gone. As science has been predicting, the sun's life-giving rays will be blacked out. No food can be grown, and no life can be supported, because we have to have the sun. Yahweh made that in Genesis. In the very beginning, remember? He made the sun and the moon so it could give light upon the earth in order to support life. That's why he made those things before he created man. It had to be there for man to be able to survive. At this moment, mankind will have finally learned that he cannot live without nor continue to ignore Yahweh and his righteous laws. Because at that time, he's going to look and he's going to realize, okay, there's no way that he could survive. He's totally hopeless. And it would be at this moment that Yahweh will step in, and at this moment will be the day of Yahweh. At this day, the people and the many priests and ministers will start repenting for their sins and for teaching against Yahweh's laws. And they will finally see that only Yahweh can save them from the terrible mess that they have brought upon this world by their obedience to Satan. And when the people realize and Yahweh steps in and saves these people from death, that's when they're truly going to realize that they've been taught nothing but lies. Now, at this moment when Yeshua steps in, Yisrayl 2, verses 11 through 17, it says, and Yahweh will utter his voice before his army, for his camp is very great. For he is strong who executes his word, the law and the prophets. For the day of Yahweh is great and very terrible. Who can endure it? Makes it sound like this mean old wrathful creature is just up there ready to crush anybody who comes face to face with him, doesn't it? But Yahweh will utter his voice. Remember, the word of prophecy will come to pass. Okay, Yahweh sent out his word and it won't return back into him void. It's not like Yahweh has an army that's fighting for him. He doesn't need that. He's Yahweh. But he will allow these things to take place so that man will actually bring himself almost to total destruction. And he allows these things because he executes his word, the law and the prophets. He allows these prophecies to come to pass so that the day of Yahweh will be great, and of course, instead of very terrible, it should be very wonderful. It would be very wonderful. Who can endure it? Well, remember Matthew 24, verse 13, 22, where it says, he who endures unto the end, right, will be saved. And then, of course, Yahweh tells us that we have to endure and overcome sin, and that is how we will have an entrance into the kingdom. That's what will keep us alive, because we have made that choice to want to live forever. Verse 14, blow the trumpet in Zion, sanctify a fast. And verse 17 talks about the priests. And jump down to Yahweh chapter 2, verse 18. It says, then Yahweh will be jealous for his land and pity his people. Well, it's not like Yahweh's going to be jealous. He's not jealous for anything. Yahweh doesn't get jealous. Why should he? How could he? He's the creator, you know. But it says here that he will pity his people. In other words, you know, again, all these has to do with the way that the people translated these things. But he will look down upon his people and have mercy upon us and deliver us, is what he's talking about. Yahweh 2:20, but then I will remove far off from you the northern army and will drive them into a land barren and desolate, which, remember, the scriptures talk about that in front of the people it will look like the Garden of Eden, and when they pass through, behind them will look like complete desolation. And so he will drive them into the land barren and desolate because of the wars. And with his face towards the east sea and his back towards the western sea, his stench will come up and his smell will rise because he has done monstrous things. Yes. Oh, maybe we should read this around Halloween time, you think? All the monsters and stuff. Right? His stench will come up and his smell will rise. Again, these are all descriptive terms talking about the fact that, you know, the stench of death will be there and so forth. And in Yahweh 2, verse 10, again it says, the sun and the moon will be darkened. Okay? Because remember, it talks about a day of gloominess and darkness. So this time brings us to this very end of the last 7 years of man's and Satan's rule upon the earth, and of course the end of the Great Tribulation. And this is a time period of man's future spoken of here in the sixth seal in Revelation 6, verse 12 through 13. And I looked when he opened the sixth seal, and behold, there was a great earthquake. A great earthquake. Now, you know, you've heard of the ring of fire, which is the whole earth is set up on tectonic plates, and they move, and this is what causes the earthquakes and so forth. Well, recently they had discovered that, you know, the San Andreas fault that goes along California actually reaches and connects to that other fault line that goes all the way up the coast there. It goes all the way up to Washington and Oregon and so forth. And around Washington and Oregon, there's a very active fault that is there. And it's a pretty huge area. It covers several states down, I believe, if I remember right. But they're just waiting for that to go at any time, too. You know, it's just like they talk about this San Andreas fault could go at any moment, and California would sink into the oceans. Well, if this thing gives, it would pretty much do the same thing. So this is something that we would feel, you know, like it says, a giant earthquake. Even though it's way, way away from us, we would still feel the effect of these earthquakes here in Texas. Okay? So we're going to see these things and be able to feel these things. And the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood. You know, and they know that this would take place because of the debris that will be up in the skies, and yet that's ridiculed. You know, they have the nuclear winter has been ridiculed by the military because they want to promote their nuclear weapons, of course, the use of them stuff. So they have ridiculed this, and they have actually gone through and had a smear campaign on the scientists that came up with the project, even though it has been proven and has been upheld by a global community of scientists. You know, they know that this will take place, and yet they still have just ridiculed it because in their minds you can survive a nuclear war. You know, if you can get there and you can use your weapons and you can survive it, because it's not going to be that bad. You know, it's going to be a little dust in the cloud, but no big deal. So this is the reason why too that they strive so much about these bunker buster bombs and stuff, because the idea is if they can get it down in the ground, it won't produce that much fallout and so forth, you know. But of course the scriptures talk about, remember, the piercing of the holes in the earth and so forth from all these bombs going off. And the stars of heaven fell from the earth as the fig tree drops its untimely figs when it's shaken by a mighty wind. So when you have an earthquake and there is a mighty wind that blows, the figs will fall off. And he says this is the way it will be with the heavens, with the stars of heaven, because of the rocking back and forth of the earth and the explosions that's going to be taking place. So at this time, the prophecy Yahweh gave to Moshe has come to pass. The sky is filled with debris from the fallout that the nuclear wars have caused. Remember, this is all due to Satan's attempt to kill Yahweh's house, which has been kept in this place of safety. In Revelation 12:16, it says, "And the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood." So we see here this earthquake takes place to stop this marching army that the prophet Yahweh described. And even the earthquake itself is a result of these powerful bombs that Satan has used and influenced mankind to use, which should be causing the nations to explode these things. And in this way, of course, the earth actually helps the house of Yahweh, as Yachanan said. It opens its mouth, and it will be a help to us, because it's going to stop a lot of the activity when, the earth is reeling to and fro and quaking back and forth. You can't really drive your vehicles and your tanks and, use your planes to hit bombs accurately when the earth is moving around. So keep that in mind, because it ain't going to be like you're just going to, skip in the park, like I said. We have to realize what the scriptures talk about. So Yahweh doesn't utter his voice until after this earthquake. Now this earthquake occurs at the same time that the heavens tremble. Like the Star Wars, way back in Reagan's time, they talked about, having these satellites and so forth that's up in heavens, to where you can take out other satellites and take out other missiles and so forth. That the sun and the moon are darkened because of all of this. Revelation 6:13 says, "And the stars of heaven fell unto the earth." And when a lot of this stuff, as the missiles are going through the sky and coming through, entering the earth's atmosphere and stuff, this is going to look like falling shooting stars and so forth that's coming down. So the Star Wars that's being anticipated at this very time will result in Star Wars during the time of the end. So what occurs next? Revelation 6, verses 14 through 17. "And the heaven departed like a scroll, when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of its places." Now the heavens will depart like a scroll. When you have a scroll that's rolled up and you unroll it, right? Well, it's going to be like just the opposite. It's going to be like a scroll is rolled out. The sky will clear up as the clouds roll back. But we're going to see this with our eyes. We'll be able to see Yeshua coming. "And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man sought protection for themselves in their governments and in the assemblies of the houses of their gods." Right? It's amazing when mankind is faced with death, how fast he can convert. Right? Well, he believes in the Creator at that time. "And he said to the houses of their gods and the assemblies, Fall on us and protect us from the face of him who sits on the throne, and notice from the wrath of the Lamb." There's that wrath again. They're going to be crying out to the gods for protection, but there will be no protection for them. Only in Yahweh. "For the great day of his judgment has come, and who will be able to stand?" Well, only those who keep Yahweh's laws will be able to stand at that time. And it's going to be a great day. We're going to look at that as being a great day because we know that it would be the time of our deliverance. So remember, the sun is dark from the nuclear blast that has just taken place. All hope of life for mankind is gone. And then the debris in the sky is rolled back at the very same time the mighty earthquake takes place. An earthquake so great that even the mountains and the islands are moved out of their places. And the throne of Yahweh Of course, it's now located in the great heavenly city, Yahweh Shema, New Jerusalem, is there. And that's the only light this world will be able to see. And that's going to be a wonderful sight for the people of Yahweh, because we're looking forward to seeing that day. Now, Revelation 3, verse 12, he says, "And he who overcomes, I will make a pillar in the house of my Father, and he will never go out of it." In other words, when you're made and put into place, into that position, you will not be removed from that position. You qualify for it, and you will have it always. It will always be yours. You will always be that pillar. You know, and the gods have always tried to imitate what Yahweh has, of course. And they have, you never notice how the temples are always made. They always have columns, right? It's those pillars that are stacked up, all the way around it. And gigantic, huge structures. Because the magnificence that they try to portray, that these gods were mighty and powerful, And it's the same thing that they've done with the Vatican. That's why the Vatican is so huge, because their idea was that they made everything so large and incredibly big that when you walked in there, that when the kings of the earth came to the Vatican, and where you have the round sections, that's the colonnades there, they would pull up there and park, and they would walk through there. And as they walked through there, those columns are so huge and magnificent that it made the king feel real small and inferior. So by the time he walked through all of this area, these big, gigantic buildings, when he walked in and appeared before the Pope, it was put in his mind that he was very insignificant, because here was this mighty Pope that he was coming before. Well, this is what the gods always played with the minds of the people, and this is why their temples were so magnificent and huge. But of course, they tried to just simply take what is not theirs, what Yahweh has said. But he says, "So he who overcomes, I will make a pillar in the house of my Father, and he will never go out of it. And I will write upon him the name of my Father, and the name of the new Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my Father, newly named." Remember, this is talking about that we would take on the name of Yahweh, the family name of Yahweh, and actually be a part of his immediate family. And that's only promised to a select group of people who have overcome. And that's the blessing of it. And Revelations 4, 1 through 6. "After this I looked, and behold, a door was opened in heaven, and the first voice which I heard was of a trumpet talking with me, which said, 'Come up here, and I will show you things which must be after this.'" You can just picture the way that the Christians think about the book of Revelation, with everything assembled and so forth. And here's a trumpet player, playing to somebody. So he says, "Come up here, and I will show you these things which must be after." And immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one on the throne. It's not like he was just transferred there and so forth, but these were visions that Yachanan had. And of course, when he was in the Spirit, he was keeping the laws of Yahweh and was holy unto Yahweh. That's the reason why these things were revealed to him. And as he says, one as one sitting on a throne, he could, in his mind's eye, he could see, the glory of Yahweh and of his government and so forth. And he who sat there had the appearance of a jasper and a sardis stone, and there was a rainbow surrounding the throne, like the appearance of an emerald. And surrounding the throne were 24 seats, and sitting on the seats I saw 24 elders, clothed in white robes, and they had crowns of gold on their heads. And out of the throne proceeded lightnings and thunderings and voices. And there were 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which signify and represent the complete plan of Yahweh. Now remember these thunders. Revelations 10. Revelations 10 verse 4 says, "And when the 7 thunders had uttered their voices, I was about to write, and then I heard a voice from heaven say to me, 'Seal up those things which the 7 thunders uttered, and do not write them.'" So this is talking about the work of Yahweh that's going on here. It's not like a big electrical thunderstorm that he was seeing taking place before the throne. But it was the work. It was the work of Yahweh that portrays the complete plan of Yahweh, notice. And before the throne there was a sea of glass like crystal, and in the midst of the throne and surrounding the throne were 4 living creatures full of eyes before and behind. You remember the eyes before and behind. This is the satellite systems and so forth, the communication systems that they have that surrounds the whole earth and so forth. Of course, Yahweh is much greater than that. It put all that to shame. But you see here, it talks about the sea of glass like crystal, as Pastor explained. It's like as if these things are all put in front of Yahweh, and he can actually see all these things come to pass right before his very eyes. And this great city, Yahweh Shema, is fully described in Revelations 21, 10 through 27. Its measurements are 2,250,000 square miles. It's not too shabby of a little shack he's got there, huh? That's a pretty nice sized place there, A huge, huge place. Yahweh Shema. Because Yahweh, of course, Yahweh wouldn't need this place. He's Yahweh, he could do whatever. But he's got a place he shows us, and he says, when Yeshua said, in my Father's house are many mansions, he wasn't joking, There's a lot of space there, But these are offices, of course, that we'll have. And he says, I urge you to read the description for yourself in your own Bible. It's a glorious sight for the servants of Yahweh, but it will be a terrible sight to the nations who have served Satan in her rebellion. Because you can imagine, when they see this take place, and their eyes are going to behold, they're going to see it, and it's going to strike fear in their minds. But at last they will know that there's one mightier. Then they will be angry because of the destruction that they help cause to this earth, of course, because they'll realize that, wow, it's my sins that cause all of this. Now, this brings us to the future history of the 7th seal here and the glory that awaits the people of Yahweh. Chapter 8 is the 7th seal on page 87, and it says, in the first 6 of the 7 seals of Yahweh, we have seen the history of this Babylonian system. This Babylonian system is recognized as a government by the people and of the people. But not for the people, because it's against the people, okay? But it is by the people and of the people, okay? Because this is a government that's set up, but of course, this is a government that has been set up to rule according to Satan's laws. And this is the Babylonian system. This goes back to the ancient times of Babylon, and even before them. Remember, Egypt was the first world ruling power that all of this came from. There's no difference. The same system has been set up, and mankind is just gone. All it's done is just change the name of it, to protect the guilty. But it's been the same system that has always been used by mankind. And of course, it's Satan's system. And that's why the laws are unfair and the laws don't make any sense. Because they have no sense. The people have no sense to be able to make righteous laws. So what very few people seem to recognize is the fact that man is very strongly influenced by Satan, who broadcasted the human mind for almost 6,000 years, and now mankind has yielded to Satan's influence. Remember, Yahweh said that she was wiser than Daniel, and Daniel was a pretty wise man, right? But Satan has had 6,000 years to, shall we say, perfect her government, So she's been working at this for a long time and has, gotten it down to where it really works. She's got the entire world deceived. The entire earth, every human being on earth, except for those who Yahweh has called out, which is a very small number, compared to the 7 billion that's alive on earth today. Now, 7 billion is only today's time. What about all the billions and the trillions who have lived before that time, since the time of Adam? The whole system has been that way. And Yahweh's only used his family. Remember, of you only, that one family, the people who he has called out, that's the ones he's always been working with. But the rest of the world has been under that satanic system. Starting with Adam, it says, Adam was the first man to yield to Satan's lies. Since that time, all of mankind has gone the way of Satan, except for a few people who Yahweh has called out of this Babylonian system to take his truth, which is a warning to the rest of the deceived world. This Babylonian system became so evil at one time that Yahweh could no longer stand to look upon the pain and the suffering that man was bringing upon himself. Therefore, Yahweh brought the flood, which destroyed all human life except for 8 people. Well, we know that, yes, the Babylonian system became evil. It's not like Yahweh could no longer stand to look upon it. You got to remember, remember what the Apostle Shalom said. He says, I write unto you, and I put it in earthly terms, okay, because as a person on the earth, a human being could understand certain things, because if certain things are written certain ways, no one would be able to understand them, And so it's even these things are written sometimes in here in the same manner. Yahweh saw the evil, and of course he knows that it's not that he could no longer stand to look upon it, but the fact is that he knew that he had gotten to the point to where things were going to have to take care of themselves, and mankind would turn on himself, and that the firmament and everything else, all the earth, would become corrupt and polluted. And so he allowed the microorganisms to produce the flood, and it destroyed all human life except for 8 people. Now, after the flood, man became evil again. He didn't learn his lesson. Now, Yahweh could have put a stop to it, but he didn't. You see, he's got to allow mankind to learn the lesson that without him, that there's no hope for mankind. Because mankind, without Yahweh's laws, man doesn't know how to love his neighbor as himself. You see? And remember what Yeshua said, on these 2 laws hang all of the laws. You must love Yahweh with all your heart, all your soul, all your might, and then you must love your neighbor as yourself. So if you don't learn those 2 things and keep those 2 things, you can't keep any of the other 613 laws. Because you have to know that all of them that deal with your neighbor is loving your neighbor as yourself, which means you have to love and respect yourself before you can show love and respect to someone else. And then you have to love Yahweh with all your heart, soul, and might. And so within that encompasses the entire body of laws. And you remember, that's what was given. Moshe was giving a body of laws. It just wasn't 1 law, 2 laws. It was a body. It was a system. The whole thing works together. It's synchronous. And you can't take one out and think that you're going to keep them all the rest. Because remember what Jacob said, you break one, you break them all. Because they all go together. They all work together as a complete unit. So, after the flood, man became evil again. He still began to start worshiping Yahweh and yielding to her influence. Satan never gave up. When she thought she had them all done, and she had to sit back and look at Noah, and then she had to wait and let mankind begin to multiply again, continue to work with them. But Yahweh did work with one group of people, and he taught them his ways. And he offered to make them a mighty nation if they would only keep his precious laws that would assure them joy and peace. But, of course, even they persisted in worshiping demons, so Yahweh allowed them to do it, and he allowed them eventually to go into the land of Egypt, brought them into the land of Egypt where every known god was worshipped, remember, and was served. And they went in and they just had full reign over everything. So under the tribute of the Egyptians, Israel experienced the consequences that God worship brings upon mankind. And for about 430 years, Yahweh allowed Israel to suffer at the hands of God worshippers until they cried out to Yahweh for mercy and for deliverance. And then at the end of the 430 years, Yahweh sent Moshe, who was, of course, a righteous and a humble man, in order to deliver them out of the bondage of sin. Okay? Out of the bondage of sin. Remember, that's what Yeshua was talking about with the people. And they said, well, we've never been in bondage. They said, and they couldn't understand that he was talking about the bondage of sin that their forefathers who had come out of Egypt were still under. It's this bondage of sin, and that's why Yahweh delivered them out of it. So Yahweh brought plague after plague upon the gods of Egypt, and Yahweh showed his great power by executing judgment against all the gods of Egypt. And remember, all the gods of Egypt were set up in different ways from every facet of a person's life. The Nile River, remember, turned to blood. Well, because the Nile was considered to be the god of life and the god of the rivers and so forth. The Nile River was as the bloodstream of the god. And Yahweh had all of these different gods. And you remember, a lot of the Egyptian gods, too, were... You can see the corruptness in the minds of them, because not only did they just have Yahweh said, don't make these gods out of the images of anything that creeps upon the earth and so forth, or of mankind and all this kind of stuff. But the Egyptians, they went even further than that. They went into bestiality, and they had the gods that were part animal and part human. And each one of these, just like the goddess that. I think goddess Heka, she was the one who had a female body with a frog's head, and this was the execution of the plague of the frogs and stuff that Yahweh went against to show these gods that his judgment was set, that you're not going to deceive the people forever. You're allowed to do whatever you are allowed to do at this time and for a certain time period, but it will not be forever. And that's why in these last days it says the gates of hell will not prevail, because Satan is finally seeing that she cannot touch the house of Yahweh. And that, once Yahweh has a work, he's going to bring it to completion, and nothing's going to stop that work. Even though these same gods are still worshipped in the world today. The gods of Egypt have never stopped being worshipped, and they're still worshipped today. Yahweh showed this love and concern for his people when they cried out to Yahweh to deliver them from this god worship. Well, but it didn't last, notice. Not many years after Israel was delivered from bondage, they again turned against Yahweh. And remember, Yahweh said, don't go back into Egypt. But they still went back into Egypt. Remember, some of them even turned around and went back before it even got any further. Went back and took over the land of Egypt. But Yahweh says, don't turn back to these things, but they did. Now, the people of the land of Egypt were with one accord decided that they wanted a government by the people and of the people. They wanted democracy or demonocracy, ruled by the demons, right? So in 1 Samuel here, they went to Samuel, remember 1 Samuel 8, verses 4 through 10. And all the elders of Israel gathered together and approached Samuel when he was at Ramah, saying to him, man, you're too old. Your sons don't walk in your ways either. So appoint to us a king to judge us, just like all the other nations. Just like all the other nations. Because what was in their mind is to go out and take over these nations. And remember, they were allowed to do this, okay? Because the promise to Abraham was that he would become the father of many nations, multitudes of nations. And that's why Israel was composed of everybody out in the world today, because they did just that. They went over and took over the nations and became mighty nations. These things displeased Samuel, especially when they said, well, give us a king to judge us. And then Samuel prayed to Yahweh, and Yahweh answered Samuel, and he said, no, listen to all the words of the people that they speak to you. They haven't rejected you, they have rejected me, then I should not reign over them. Not that Yahweh is a king. Yahweh is not a king. Okay? Yahweh is not a king. But he uses this in a sense that as the nations, just as they don't want me to reign over them, just like a king reigns over a group of people. But just as they have done to me from the day that I brought them out of Egypt to this very day, they are now doing to you, and they are forsaking me in order to serve gods. Okay? So this shows you that the gods of Egypt, the Egyptian lifestyle, is still coveted by this world, and they're still worshiping these gods even to this day. So Yahweh said, well, listen to them. However, solemnly forewarn them, and let them know how the king who will rule over them will behave towards them. And Samuel spoke all the words of Yahweh to the people who had asked him for a king. So now after this people had the king that they asked for, then Yahweh sent prophet after prophet to warn the people what this system would bring to all mankind. And if you remember in Hebrews 11, verses 35 to 40, it said that women received the dead raised to life again, others were tormented. It said others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, chains and imprisonment. Some were stoned, some were sawed in two, some were slain with the sword. Some wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute and afflicted and tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains and dens and caves of the earth, and all these, having obtained a righteous report through the faith, have still not received the promise. Yahweh having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect. Okay, but this is how he sent his prophets, prophet after prophet, to try and turn the people around and make them realize the error of their ways. So, Yahweh is very merciful, and he tries to warn the people. And the servant of Yahweh, Stephen, you remember, he told about the history. He was being persecuted. He told the whole history about the rebellion of the people of Israel. He stood up strong, and he told them, he says, remember, this is what your forefathers did in Acts chapter 7, verse 51 through 60. You stiff-necked, rebellious, and uncircumcised in heart and ears, you do always resist the Holy Spirit, just as your fathers did, so do you also. He didn't back down from them. Which of the prophets have you, and think about it now, he's in this area where he knows he's gonna die, So when you read these stories and stuff, you can see how Yahweh put it within these people to be so bold and strong at that time, because they knew they were facing death. So what better way could they do than to witness for Yahweh and just really tear into these people, So which of your prophets have not your fathers persecuted, that they have slain those who foretold the coming of the just one, of whom you now have become betrayers and murderers? You who have received the law, as it was ordained and delivered by Malachim, have not kept it. They have not kept it. Notice that word received, have received the law. Let's see. Let me read about the word receive. This is from the fourth book of Israel, the Reverence of Yahweh, number 14. Pastor says, let me show you what this word receive means. It means to take a thing due to agreement or law. Yeshua was sent according to the law. He says you can't receive Yeshua unless you receive the full plan of Yahweh. To receive what is offered, not just to human beings, but the whole contract. In other words, not to refuse or to reject in order to obey him. He says, I'm reading this from Thayer's. In order to obey him, his every word, to believe the testimony and imitation of the Hebrew of various senses of the Old Testament, even in Gesenius, Thessalonians 2, page 916. To receive a person, to give him access to oneself, to give yourself over to him, regard anyone's rank or power. So this is all what the word means, to give yourself over to someone and to regard someone's rank or power. So when Stephen was saying here, you received the law, but you didn't keep it, they never submitted themselves to Yahweh. They never allowed him, because remember his rank and power, when the very first law is to believe in Yahweh, right? And to acknowledge him as your heavenly Father. And of course, Yeshua, remember he says he came to his own, but his own didn't receive him. Because he had the authority, and he gave people the authority to become the sons of Yahweh if they believed in him. And that's why Stephen talks about, he says, the just one came, and yet you murdered him. So when they heard these things, they were cut to the heart, and they gritted their teeth with rage. And he, being full of Spirit holy, looked up steadfastly into heaven and saw the glory of Yahweh, with Yeshua standing on the right hand of Yahweh. In other words, in his mind's eye, he could see these things, and in his mind, he could comprehend that he was standing up for righteousness. And he said, behold, I see the heavens open and the Son of Man standing on the right hand of Yahweh. And then they cried with a loud voice and put their hands over their ears, and they ran upon him with one accord. See, they could all get together on that, couldn't they? That's something they could all agree upon. You ever notice that? You know, when it comes to evil, everybody can agree with evil. But when it comes to righteousness, that's a different story. You got to work really hard to be in unity, to be righteous. But evil, man, everybody can join together for that. Because you can do whatever you want to do when you do evil. And they drove him out of the city, and they stoned him, and then the witnesses laid their clothes at the feet of a young man whose name was Saul. And they stoned Stephen, who was calling upon Yahweh, and saying, Savior Yahweh, receive my spirit. Then he kneeled down and cried with a loud voice, Yahweh, do not hold them responsible for their sin. And when he had said that, he fell asleep. You know, it shows you the righteousness and the love that he had. He realized that, you know, Yahweh, don't hold this against them, because they don't realize what they're doing. They don't know what they're doing, you know. And he followed the same example as Yeshua, when Yeshua was hanging there and said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So throughout the ages, Yahweh had warned this Babylonian system of the world that the world is living in right now, that eventually it's going to bring destruction to this earth. You know, there's no possible way that you can go any other way. It's got to be destroyed, because the whole system is based upon destruction. From the very beginning, it started. And when it started with very simple things. Because you got to remember, rebellion, sin is sin. You can't measure it. There's no quantity of sin. You can't measure sin. Sin is sin. But it started off with the little things. Remember, Yeshua said, be faithful in little things, you'll be faithful in much. Because if you're not faithful in the little things, it's those little things that will eventually lead into far greater things. And 6,000 years, Satan's been working to where, in the very beginning, something very small and insignificant that people didn't even really think about when they did it, that's what eventually led to the point to where we're at now. Because sin has grown. You know, like it says, sin has reached its peak. And it started off in very small, subtle ways. And then as generation after generation after generation went on, the sins added and added and added and added. You know, it may not seem like it's very much when someone does something, and they may think, oh, well, darn, I got to confess, you know. But after thousands and thousands and thousands of years of doing certain things like that, it adds and adds and adds and adds and grows and grows and grows and grows until where sin has reached its peak, to where we see now where the whole earth is defiled because of man's sin. And it's your sin and my sin that has added to that and brought the world to the point to where it's at right now. Because we are humans and we live on this earth. But the thing is that we have a way where we have the ability to be able to repent and show Yahweh that we're sorry for our sins and ask forgiveness for those things. But all of our past sins, we added to it. Therefore, throughout the ages here, so Yahweh warned this Babylonian system for 6,000 years, and we see the warnings that Yahweh has given to man throughout that time now coming to pass. Technology has now developed to the point that all life can be wiped out by the detonation of only a few nuclear explosions. Only a few. You know, that's all, what as massive as these bombs are, that's all it would really take. Because, you know, I mean, once it's up there, years ago, when the firmament could handle it, and this is why the military is so deceived, because you're talking about, you know, over 50 years ago. Well, the firmament was in a lot better shape than it is now. You know, and they think, well, when the explosion that goes up and the fall up goes out, you know, it would all be taken care of itself, and the air would clean itself, and the wind would blow it away, and it just eventually would just dissolve. But the firmament can't act that way now. You know, the firmament is not capable of getting rid of this stuff the way it could years ago. So a few huge bombs could destroy mankind, because of the fact that if the firmament can't handle it and get rid of it, it's got to come down on earth, and it's got to affect us in different ways. So anyone should be able to see that this world can't continue to exist under the leadership of man. You know, man's had it for 6,000 years, and we could see what he's done with it. It's not getting any better, and it won't get any better because the people have not been trained in living right. And that's why Yahweh says, you know, he's given the earth to the children of men. He's given it to them. And like Psalms 37 says, the meek will inherit the earth. You know, because the earth is the possession that Yahweh gave the earth to man to enjoy. And we're going to have the earth. We're going to have it and restored. It's going to be restored back to its original beauty. And we'll actually be able to enjoy the earth. We'll actually be able to enjoy the food that the earth has created in means by which we can't even comprehend right now. But man has never taken advantage of that, you know. Once sin entered into the world, that was it. From that point on, it's completely downhill. The earth began to be cursed, and that was it, you know. And like it says, with the blood of all the bloodshed that's taken place and all the wars, you know, that's just done nothing but defile the earth. It's poisoned the earth. And generation after generation after generation, there's been nothing but wars, continual wars, as mankind has taken a hold of the ways of Cain. So world leaders admit the fact that for this world to have peace, we must have a one-world government capable of enforcing peace and putting down rebellion and resistance against it. They admit that, and their idea of this one-world government, the one-world order, it still wouldn't do anything. You know, they should be able to see that, you know, even with the European Union, you know, the whole purpose of that was to put all these nations together and act as one big, huge thing, but it doesn't work. You know, there's still problems with it, and nations are wanting to split off of it, you know, as Britain has done. But they know that something is needed, but they don't have the governmental structure that would allow it to take place. Because they can't put down rebellion and resistance against it, because the only way they know how to do that is by force. You know, and this is what Yeshua said, that they take it by force. Everything is dealt with by force. You know, they force you into doing these things. But for such a government to stand, they must have fair and righteous laws that are just for all men. Now, remember what democracy is? You go back to page 87, where democracy, where it talked about this Babylonian system as a government based by the people and of the people, you know. But these just, fair, and justice, righteous laws are for all people. Now, see, Yahweh's law, his system is set up of the people, by the people, and it will be for the people, you know, because it will be the people of Yahweh who will be ruling this government. And it will be for all people because it will be for all the universe to be able to live by, you know. So when this is set up, then you will have true peace everywhere here on earth, and it will eventually will go out throughout the universe, bringing this forth. And this is why it says they're all looking for the redemption of the sons of Yahweh, because they're longing to be delivered. You know, they're looking for us as being the saviors of the universe, and they're waiting for that, longing for it. Just that we see everything here on earth, and we think only our minds, as finite as they are, see everything. You know, we think of everything just here on earth. To us, it's hard to comprehend how, you know, the house of Yahweh is going to spread out, and we're going to eventually take over Texas and then the U.S. and, you know, start taking over the entire world, you know, man's governments. It's hard for us to fathom because we can't really see like that. But that's what we need to be looking for. You know, we always need to be looking towards the future. What are the promises of Yahweh? What has Yahweh given unto us? What has he promised unto us? And if we do that, then that's what helps us get by day by day by day, you know. And you won't have time to be arguing with your brother. You won't be time to be having no disagreements with someone, because all you'll see is the promise that Yahweh has given to you, and it will be in front of you. And that's where your mind should be. You got to get rid of these things, and there'll be nothing but total unity in Yahweh's house with everybody. The seventh seal pictures the means by which Yahweh will use to take over these warring nations and bring them under his control. And he's going to bring them under control. but it's going to be through the teaching of his laws. It's not going to be through force, as mankind always thinks everything has to be done through force, that you've got to force them. And many prophets, other than Yochanan, who wrote Revelations, has written about these events that's going to take place in the last 7 years of man's rule. However, it's impossible to understand these prophecies without the key to prophecy that's given in the book of Revelation, because in the book of Revelation, Yochanan has given a timetable of events, and it's vital to understanding what's going to take place in the history of the world at the proper time. Yahweh has it all laid out. It's like he says about the sea of glass. He's got it all laid out before him, and he knows exactly what's going to take place and how it's going to take place, and he sets it in motion. One simple thing started sin that got to the point to where it led mankind to fall. And it's the same thing with getting to us today. When Yahweh worked with mankind and he began to write these things in the hearts and the minds of men, and then he started it off so that as each generation would pass by, it would carry on that one time. When you think about the DNA is microscopic, and yet you have all of the information that's needed there to be able to create a human being, for a human being to remain alive. But, we all have our own individual minds. We're all individual people. We all have our own individual personalities and so forth. And yet Yahweh knew that, and he has all of that set up to where as each generation goes on, people look similar in families and stuff. You can tell sometimes some people belong to a certain family because the children look alike, But every individual on earth is different, and you're talking about billions and trillions of people since the time of Adam, and yet Yahweh was able to make every one of these different, But he put it in mankind to where, you would have evil people, but a person might be evil, but he might have one tiny gene that carried righteousness. And that passed on to the next generation. And the next generation might have been evil, but it still had that righteous gene, and that was passed on to another generation. And then as you're reading the scriptures, that the father might have been bad, but then the son maybe turned out okay. Or maybe the grandson turned out all right, and the father and the son was bad. And then as that generation, when that one little righteous gene was allowed to pass on to another generation, and then that was taken and Yahweh used it and ended up bringing forth righteousness. And so all of these genes that have been passed on throughout all of these thousands of years have eventually come down to us and have entered into us. And this is how Yahweh allowed our minds to be open. But it started off very small. And Yahweh says he's making us into his image and into his likeness, to be like Yahweh, so that we can actually think like Yahweh and act like Yahweh. But we have to allow ourselves to become that way. We've got all of this training that we've been through that Yahweh expects us to use. And if we don't use it, we'll lose it. But he's allowing us to actually be made into his image and his likeness, to be like the Creator himself. And we can't fathom that because, we tend to think along the minds of just finite mankind, and we still think with a carnal mind and so forth at times. But if we could always keep our minds focused on these things, when you looked at your brother, you would always see Yahweh in your brother. And you've got to see Yahweh in your brother. When Pastor taught, I am Yahweh to you and you are Yahweh to me, he was teaching us what the scriptures teach. When Yahweh says you must love Yahweh with all your heart, soul, and might, that means everything you've got has got to be for your Creator. And then he says love your neighbor as yourself. Because he made man, he's making us into his image and his likeness. So yes, you are Yahweh to me, and I am Yahweh to you, because we are being made into the image and the likeness of Yahweh. And to think out of billions and billions and billions of people, he chose us and brought us to this day. Now we got to think every day of our lives, what have we done this day to draw closer to Yahweh? And if we messed up, then we got to repent about it, and then we go on, you know. But we don't wallow in the mire. As it says, a just man may pick himself up 7 times, he may fall. But he'll keep picking himself up and keep going. But we got to get extremely serious about our walk with Yahweh and realize what Yahweh has given it to us, because, you know, time is running out, and we'll end up losing it. We'll lose all that Yahweh has that he wants to give into us. Because remember, it's all in the heavens. It's already reserved for us. He's just waiting to give it to us. Let me get back here. Let's see. Where did I leave off? The leaders of the nations know that they're not capable of bringing peace to this world, but neither do they want to give up their leadership. You know, they know they can't solve the problems, like Trump going in there. You know, he knows he can't solve these problems, but, you know, hey, it's a prestige thing, you know. That's the way that mankind is. And these leaders, they don't want to give up their leadership. And these leaders, as Scripture show, will resist the soon coming kingdom of Yahweh. They resist even though, I mean, come on, you mean I got to give up? Come on, man. I've invested billions and billions of dollars. I'm not going to be able to keep this stuff? You mean others are going to have it? No way, man, no way. You know, and that's what's in their mindset. Remember, because as the Scripture says, the love of money is a root of all evil. You know, they can't comprehend that they could actually share these things and share this wealth with someone and actually get the message out to others and share these things with people. But it's greed, it's suffering, but they don't want to give it up. And they will resist, even though by the time that Yahweh takes over the kingdoms of this world, man will have brought himself to the place in future history that all life on this earth would be destroyed. And you can just picture that. Devastation, everything black, dark skies everywhere around, every tree and blade of grass completely burned up, and you're standing there, and yet the first thing in the man's mind would be like, how can I start a new business? You know, that I can start a cleanup business. Yeah, that's what I can do. You know, their mindset is to continually for the things, nothing that Yahweh says, you know, never reflecting upon the fact that how did I bring this earth to this point to begin with? But how can they better themselves? Always thinking about themselves rather than service to mankind. So what would cause these leaders to resist? The very thing that would cause these leaders to resist is the very same thing that causes mankind to resist Yahweh's laws today. Satan will be blaming all the world's troubles on the house of Yahweh. Satan now makes the world believe that Yahweh's laws are a burden to man. And this deception will be greatly increased just before the end of this age. And that's the way it is now. You know, deception has taken over to where mankind, you know, like the Scripture says, they look upon evil as being righteous and righteousness as being evil. You know, it's just a completely opposite of what mankind, the promises that's been given to mankind is turned around to where it's not a promise, it looks more like a curse, you know. I mean, you got to stop all the things that you enjoy doing, you can't do because, you know, you got to be righteous. You know, that's, you know. Well, that's the mindset that mankind put, because remember, you were born with a mind that was totally against Yahweh, totally against your Creator, to where you actually hate the Creator and hate anything righteousness about it. But Yahweh's working greatly with His house, and you can see the tremendous growth that we've gone through and the unity that's taking place in Yahweh's house, right? Praise Yahweh. And, you know, this is only going to be the beginning. Still got a ways to go. Keep working hard, brothers. Keep working hard. Let's prove to Yahweh that we want His kingdom more than all else, and He's going to give it to us, okay? May Yahweh bless you.